Hey, hey. So I figured I would start this sort of new series. Not a series, but way of structuring some of my videos called Reading, Read to Read. Basically, maybe like a weekly recap or some such thing where I am looking at what I'm currently reading, what I've recently read, and what I'm still hoping to read. And that being kind of a window into my reading life, also kind of giving me feedback and accountability for how often I'm reading, how frequently, because ultimately, while I don't want to play the volume game, I do think for myself it's important that I set goals in terms of how much I'm reading, because I think that's ultimately going to help me read more and enjoy that reading more. The weird thing about my reading habits is that I so often fail to do it, fail to make time to read. And then when I do, I enjoy it thoroughly. It reminds me of how I am with writing. I don't write that often, but when I do, more specifically with poetry, I always enjoy myself and I always feel a greater degree of fulfillment than in the moments where I've chosen not to write poetry. And so I feel the same about reading. So I thought it'd be interesting, at least to me, as with all these videos, at least to me, to talk about what I'm reading, what I've just read, and what I'm hoping to read. So as far as the what am I reading currently, I actually just started The Hobbit last night. This is a book that I've um, listened to on audio once before, but it was several years ago, and I've never read it on the page. So I decided that I wanted to get it underway and finally get a read of it instead of a listen under my belt, especially because a good friend of mine on September 22nd of every year starts a reread of The Lord of the Rings. And some of you may know that that is Hobbit Day, Bilbo and Frodo's birthday. I know it's at least Bilbo's birthday. I've started to feel uh, unsure that it's also Frodo's birthday in the past couple times that I've mentioned Hobbit Day. I think it's both of their birthdays. And he always starts it on that day. He uh, precedes it with a read of the Silmarillion, which I'm not going to do, not yet. And he's probably read it, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. And I've mentioned for a couple years, that I would join him, and I've always failed to do so. Usually laughably failed to do so, in the sense that I've not even started at all, let alone started and then not finished. So this year it just feels like the year. Finally feels like the year for me. It's a huge gap in my reading The Lord of the Rings. But instead of the Silmarillion, I decided that I would finally read The Hobbit on the page. So we're into that. I'm one chapter in. I'm reminded, once again, I know the structure of the story and I know the narrative, but reminded that from what I've read of The Lord of the Rings, and I've read excerpts, the prose in The Hobbit is obviously addressed to children in the way that it's structured, in the tonality of it, just in the way that he has his characters speak in those books. So far, it's very much a different sort of syntax and a different tonal quality, which I found really interesting. And there was a couple um, sentences in there, especially, that were explicitly making a more complex sentence simpler via the narrator, clearly as a way of allowing children who are listening to the story or reading it themselves have a better understanding of what's going on. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's immediately charming. Um, uh, he knows how to tell a story, and that's very clear. And I'm excited to eventually leave the Shire and go on this merry adventure to the Misty Mountains, um, in the village of Dale, and the encounter with Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies, all of that stuff. So I am reading that. I'm also reading Shade the Changing Man. This is issue 3. I started this a few months back. I have most of the issues now. It's one of those where only the, I don't know, first 20 or so issues have been collected in omnibuses. Omnibuy? No, who knows what the plural of that is. Probably just omnibuses. So I decided that I wasn't even going to bother collecting them in that and just see if I could get some bundles on eBay of like single issues, which I was able to get, and I've gotten a few, so I've kind of filled in the gaps. But this is issue number 3 of Shade the Changing Man. Sorry I have crap lighting. Eventually I'll have decent lighting, but we'll have to deal with the natural lighting for now. But yeah, really cool series. It follows Shade, who is a extraterrestrial of sorts, yet humanoid in some sense. At least he embodies a human when he's not in other forms, and he's from the Zone of Madness. And it's written by Peter Milligan, who I've heard is quite a good comic writer. It's got some really cool art, but it's very societally aware and politically aware, even this far in. So right now we're in kind of a storyline that has to do with this individual who's obsessed with the Kennedy assassination, and via his obsession focuses another zone of madness or a area of madness in like the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So now that Shade has arrived on Earth, all of these zones of madness, these areas of madness are popping up over the United States and basically causing mass hysteria and mass hallucination, but also like physical changes in the geology, and like which allows for the artist to create really neat imagery. Like this is a giant like bust of Kennedy, just things like that, and some of the artwork is really neat. I haven't finished this issue, so I don't have a great, but like here, I'll show a full page here. It's like a Uncle Sam but skeleton figure with people buried in its chest, and like, I don't know, just very, very cool, psychedelic, but also seemingly very aware. And I've heard that the writing only improves as it goes on, and it's already, decent, especially for comic book writing. So I'm reading that. I finally got around to issue 3. I took a pretty long break between 2 and 3, which is unfortunate because 2 and 3 are connected. I'm also still reading Jim Butcher's Stormfront, which is the first in the Harry Dresden books, the Dresden Files. I've been reading that for a long, long time. I just haven't been consistent with reading it. I have been enjoying it. I've been listening it partially on audiobook as well when I listen to it or read it. Kind of going back and forth between those two modes. That's been pretty fun. I mean, it's nothing crazy, and I've also heard that the first few books of that series are especially simple, and he's still building his world, and it's kind of getting its feet under it. So I'm excited to keep going. I'm having a good time. I'm also technically reading Stoner by John Williams, which at the time I last read it, which was a few months ago, was thoroughly enjoying it, and I plan to get right back into that here shortly. Really impressed with it so far. I know that there's opinions on this here booktube that it's something that people convince themselves that they like, but I don't know. I don't really have much truck with that opinion. Hasn't been too hard for me to convince myself that I'm enjoying myself. Even if that does make me a dude bro. And I'm also reading The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, which is lovely. Twain is just an excellent storyteller, has a great handle on just boyhood, which I resonate with, being a boy once. And his ability to dip in and out of more ornate prose, to go from that to more just simple character prose, is really lovely. There's a lot of like sort of Victorian sentences in there mixed with like Americana and this sense of like the rural countryside and like the small town and all of that. Just really lovely. And Tom is just a great schemer character. You know, the young rogue. It's lovely. And then I haven't picked this book up in a while, but I am reading The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which I've been finding very interesting. I think it's exactly where John Green belongs. I don't know that he belongs in young adult literature, but I do think he belongs in that sort of contemplative nonfiction. He is exactly made for that. If anyone's familiar with the Vlogbrothers channel that he runs with his brother Hank, he is excellent at crafting a video essay, and so that really translates to a print essay, because it's a collection of essays, and the conceit is that he's reviewing aspects of life and giving it like a star rating. So he'll review like scratch and sniff stickers, or review the Lascaux paintings, or Liverpool's "You Never Walk Alone" anthem, like stuff like that. And it's really lovely. I love the word lovely. You'll notice that. Yeah, that's pretty much it for what I'm reading. What I just read, so I just read Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett. I actually just finished that the other night. That was another book that I took way too long to read. I'm hoping that I will be able to more consistently finish books and in a smaller time frame, shorter time frame, to give them their best due. But thought it was good. I ended it less charmed than I began it. I think some of the stylistic elements that Dashiell Hammett's employing, which he deserves so much credit for because he basically created the hard-boiled genre in as much as we know it, from what I understand. By the end there, I was not tiring of it, but I was no longer impressed with it. Even though the writing remained great. As far as like on a sentence to sentence level, it remained great. My impression of it didn't continue to rise. It was started very high and was never increased really. And I don't think I did it too great of a service by waiting as long as I did to finish it. It's such a pacey book too. That's the great thing about it, is you can read it really quickly. There was many times when I read that book where I'm usually like, I read a chapter of a book and then I like to go to a different book. I like to jump around. But with that book, I found myself very easily going from chapter to chapter and reading several chapters at a time, which I think for a lot of readers is not that remarkable, but for me, is for sure. Yeah, I thought it was good. I think it kind of ended on a whimper for a book that's so focused on this corrupt city. The way that it ended, I thought was a little. I don't even want to use the word anticlimactic. I guess that's probably the word, but just yeah, sort of fizzled out. Which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting a bit more of a crescendo there at the end, or some type of bigger reveal, or just something. I don't know. It didn't really hit me as particularly eventful there at the end. I mean, I also wasn't convinced about the structure. There's like 3 kind of inciting incidents. So we move from one, and then that gets resolved, and then we have another, and that gets resolved, and then we have another, and that gets resolved. Sort of. The middle one, I guess, doesn't is sort of an ongoing project, but yeah, the structure. I'm not sure if I have a critique against it. It's one of those where like I don't feel confident enough to say like, yeah, this was bad, or not even bad, but just not to my liking. But I'm also not convinced in the other way that I was really impressed with the structure. So I'm kind of, still figuring that out. But yeah, I finished that up and was really was impressed, but not as impressed as I thought I would be. So still excited to get to more Dashiell Hammett, like the Maltese Falcon and the Dane Curse and The Glass Key and some of his short stories. I mean, there's still plenty of his to read, but I'll probably take a detour to several other crime writers before I get back to him. There's so many crime writers that I want to get to. It's insane. So that is what I've read. Now, what am I going to read? What would I like to read? Well, obviously, the books that I'm still reading, I'm going to continue to do so, but I do think I will here soon add How to Read a Book and Why by Harold Bloom. He's an author that I would really like to read. Obviously a magisterial literary critic in the space, although he's no longer with us. But there's several books of his that I'd like to get to, as well as just reading his general writing, essays, and even his literary criticism. Like, he has whole books dedicated to other books, right? He has a book on Fahrenheit 451, for example. It's like, well, I'd love to check that out just to see what type of discussion he's creating around that book. But yeah, How to Read a Book and Why. He goes through poems, plays, novels, short stories, and basically picks out several from each genre or each medium, and basically just spends, maybe 2 or 3 pages breaking it down, and sort of talking about the processes by which someone might read well, right? Their approach to reading, which I appreciate. I know he's a divisive character, but I like those sorts of characters, so excited to get into that. Also, probably be getting into Herodotus's Histories for the Harvard Classics series. I don't quite know how I'm going to approach it yet, because in the kind of reading guide that I'm using right now, it only calls for like chapter 2, or like his second history, which is about Egypt, because that's what that segment of this reading guide is dealing with, is the history of Egypt. So I don't know if I'm just going to take this as an opportunity to read the whole histories, or if I'm just going to read that chapter for the Harvard Classics series and then move on with the rest of the reading guide. It happens a little bit later too with the Aeneid. There's a portion dealing with Greece that is only to do with the fall of Troy, which I think is book 2 of the Aeneid. So it's like, am I going to take that opportunity to just read the whole Aeneid, or just read that section? Because then later, during the I think the imperial portion of Rome in the history, in the Story of Civilization, which is the name of this reading guide, that has the whole Aeneid. So maybe I will just take it as pieces, and then when it calls for the whole work, read it then. I still am undecided on that. But yeah, I'll probably be adding the histories to the reading pile as well. So there's probably some other books I could mention, but that probably clears it up. And yeah. Let me know what you think of this sort of approach to talking about what I've read. I probably could clean it up a little bit and shorten it, but I like kind of just flying off the cuff. And yeah, I'm excited. It's a good reading time. Hopefully I can have more to report as I do more of these, because I'll be reading more. That's the hope and the idea. We'll have to see. But yeah, I'll see y'all next time.